We're in the process of changing the Mandrel bender tooling over. We've got all of the bender stripped down. So this looks quite messy. We've got nuts and bolts everywhere and tools. This is the kind of raw components of the bender. This is where the bend die sits. And then we've got the clamping portions. So this is the clamp end that grabs onto the tube and bends it. And then this is the clamp end which pushes the tube against the wiper die and helps to keep the form of the tube nice. So it keeps a nice round bend. So yeah, there's a lot of big hydraulics on this machine. It's all good fun. So yeah, we've got it all stripped down. So now we're going to go through the process of building it all back up. The first thing to remember is that with the way all this is set up, you can only really work from the outside in and then the inside out, because all of the tooling kind of traps the other tooling on. So the first thing to put on is the bend die. So this is a pretty heavy piece of tooling. So this is a 70mm diameter tool on a 1.5D radius. That's 105mm centerline radius. And that just slips on the top there. There's a little keyway to keep it in the parallel position. Make sure it's all free and dust free, clean. That's the most important thing. Tooling's got to go on clean. We always clean it when it comes off, and it's got to go on clean. The cleaner all your tooling is, the nicer condition it is, all in, you're going to get nicer bends. So once we've got the bend die on, we want the mandrel on next. So this is a fairly crucial component. What we've got is the main shaft of the mandrel, and then all the mandrel balls and the links that actually hold all these together. So every now and then we'll strip all these down because they do tend to accumulate quite a lot of lube and bits of dirt and crap that come from the inside of the tubes. I mean, you can clean it all out, but you actually accumulate dirt as you're going through the bending process. And that dirt then gets transferred to the inside of the mandrel. It wears the mandrel, and again, with lesser quality bends. So yeah, it's a really important part to keep clean, because this actually just sits inside the tube and helps keep the tube and a perfect round shape as it's bent. So this goes on in here and it screws on. This can be a bit tricky to get lined up to start with, again just mainly because of the weight of it, but once it's on it's not too bad. Just a case of screwing it on. There's a lot of thread here, it's quite a fine thread. There's a lot of force on this mandrel as it's going through the bending process. So because the clamps are kind of forcing that tube into the mandrel and into the wiper die and into the bend die, the mandrel takes quite a lot of force. So what essentially is happening as the tube is being bent is it's trying to pull the mandrel balls and the mandrel off of this shaft. So again, that all needs to be super sturdy, super strong. It's really hard to get across how much force and pressure is required to bend some of these larger diameters, and the 70 and 76 or 2 3/4 and 3-inch tube with a 1.5mm wall thickness, you are really running at the maximum of what this machine can do. So yeah, it does require an awful lot of hydraulic force. Next thing is to put the clamps on. So again, we've got it all nice and clean in there. Again, that's really crucial in terms of getting nice quality bends. If you've got crap inside all of those grooves, those are the grooves that actually grip onto the tube and bend it. You're going to get marks onto the tube. And of course we don't want that. And that just slips in there, locks into that keyway. And then we've just got 2 big 10mm bolts that go in there. These don't need to be super tight because this kind of clamps itself on. So as this clamp comes forward and crushes into the bend die, the keyways keep it in place, and the ram actually stops it falling out of position anyway. So these bolts don't need to be mega tight. You literally just give them a little tweak just to keep them, make sure they're home. And then we've got the follow die or pressure die, depending on your terminology. So this is where things start to get really heavy. It's probably a good 50 kilos in this piece of steel. And that just drops on. On there. We've already got our height set. There's like a little set screw in the top there, which sets the height relevant to the clamp. The clamp height sets the mandrel height, because when you've got a piece of tube in between the clamps, between the die and the clamp, that sets the height of the mandrel. And then off of the height of that, you then set the height of this, and realistically all of that never changes. But it is possible to start fine-tuning it and shimming it, things like that. I think you probably have to do that quite a bit if you've got a fairly old machine. But given that ours is a really new machine, yeah, we don't have to do any of that. So that's that on, super easy. Next we've got the planar bend clamps. So because we've got a 2-axis bender, we need another set of clamps which actually grab the back of the tube if we're doing multi-axis bends. So if we want to turn a bend on its axis, on its x-axis or z-axis, as it's bent, we need to grab the other end of it. So we only really do that on multi-bend sections. There's no need to do that on just a single one-off bend, but it is a really handy feature to have, because like I said, it does allow you to then do multi-axis bends. So next up we need to get these tie bars on. So again, these just reinforce the bender. So as this clamp die and clamp ram come across, again, it's trying to prise the bender apart essentially at the top. This ram is putting so much force on there, you know, it's going to try and pull it all apart. So these tie bars are really crucial. But again, they don't need to be tight. You just reefing them up, hand tight, and then we'll tighten that lock nut up. Again, don't really need to be mega tight. Not when you've got a spanner this big. Quite a bit of leverage on that. So next up is the wiper die, and this is where the setup gets really crucial. We've got to get that wiper die in bang on the right position. If we don't, we're going to end up with bad bends. So it's really important as well to keep this wiper die in really good condition. You want to get these recut on a fairly regular basis. This looks, it doesn't look great, but it's actually, you're still going to get a really high quality bend off of here. We'll probably get another 500 or so bends out of this before we need to get this recut. What you end up with is wearing this away so much that you then end up without a nice feather edge. And if you don't have that feather edge, you end up with essentially like a little lump at the very start of the bend, where the bend has started. You end up with a little lump, and that's because there's been a space for the material to form into as it's been bent. So I've got two more bolts. It just mounts on this bar. It all gets tweaked up throughout the process of setting up the wiper die. And again, this position's really crucial. If you don't get this position right, again, you will end up with bad bends. So this is where we have to do a bit of tweaking. We can usually get it right first or second time. You know, sometimes it ends up taking a little bit of time, but yeah, usually it's not too bad. So with this mount loosened off, we want to put that in there. That's where that's going to live. And then we're going to put these bolts in the back of there. And again, all of this just gets left kind of loose to start with. Then what we'll do is we'll put a piece of tube in, and we'll use that piece of tube to set the position of the die. And that's usually the best way of setting it, really. You can try and set it by eye. I'm sure some people can. Some people have probably been doing it 20, 25 years, but yeah, tube's like a really fail-safe way of doing it. If you just put that piece of tube in there, you can force the die into the back of that tube, kind of wedge the die in between the tube and the bend die, and then you end up with knowing that it's in the correct position. Like I say, sometimes you just have to give it a little bit of a tweak. So you then remove the tube, push it forward a little bit, put a bit of rake on it or something like that. But yeah, you can usually get it pretty bang on that way. So yeah, that's all set up, it's all tooled up now, ready for a piece of tube. So we've got an offcut of tube here, which is just a scrap piece, or it's not really scrap, but it's not, you know, not designated for anything in particular, so we'll use this for a setup. Again, it's just really important to make sure that when you are setting it all up, it's all nice and clean, just as the tube that you're putting in the bender to do your production bends would be. We're going to take some lube on a paintbrush. I'm just going to shove that down there as far as we can get it, make sure the inside of that tube is nicely coated, and then as I push the tube onto the mandrel, that'll lubricate the mandrel and get the lube in between all the mandrel balls. If you're just doing bends on one axis, you always want to try and have that seam at the top or at the bottom, purely because it's going to do the least amount of stretching at that point. So I'm just going to push that tube in there right until I get to the point where I've got none sticking out the clamp. And that's it, we're ready to set her up. So this is just the bender initializing, it's just setting its home position. Just figuring out where it is, making sure it's all calibrated. So that's it, that's all initialized now. Let's get that tube in at the edge. Now I want to bring the clamp across. So that's the clamp all the way across. I need to move one of these locking collars for this Hall effect sensor, so that the clamp knows where its new home position is. We've put bigger tooling on, so it's larger diameter bend die, larger diameter tube, so the ram is much further that way than it was before, so we need to bring the collar in to match it. Now that we've got the tube clamped up, that makes the tube nice and rigid in the bender. So what we want to do now is we want to tap this into position. So again, it's just a case of, to start with, just lightly tapping that in there until it finds its natural home position. Which you'll know that because the tone will change. So you can hear that is all the way home now. That's going to be as far forward as we can really get it without starting to hit it really hard. And it's not about how hard you're hitting it, it's more about just making sure it's set in the correct position. So what I'll do now is I'll just loosely tighten these a bit more. Ooh, I think I've got that somewhere in the middle. But again, it's all kind of setting itself. Sometimes it takes a little bit more setting up than others, sometimes it's a bit more finicky. It depends on the tooling size, again, how well worn the wiper die is, all those kinds of things. That's why it's really crucial as well to keep all of the tools in really good condition. Right, so we've got the wiper die set in its kind of initial position, got the tube clamped up. We now need to bring the pressure die across, and now we need to set the position of this. So again, we had smaller tooling on before, so I've wound it right off to allow us to remove the tooling. Now we need to wind that right on again. So that's the ram moved all the way forward. Now what we'll do is we'll wind it all on, wind the die in, and then again we can kind of try and set a pressure at that point. So I'm just going to wind it on until it goes tight, and then try and, using the size of this wheel, get it as tight as I can. And then we usually just need it about another quarter or half turn tighter, but we'll find that out as we try and do the first bend. Right, so we've got the pressure die in the correct position, the mandrel's clamped up, mandrel's all the way forward. So now it's just a case of doing a first test bend. So what we'd do is we'd normally do like a 20-degree bend or something like that, like a really small bend angle, so we can start to see if it's in the right kind of position. And then when we think that looks okay, we'll go to a bit more of a bend angle, maybe 45. Once that looks okay, we'll probably go right down to a 90. And if that looks okay, it's fine, it's good to go. So that's 23 degrees. We'll pull the mandrel out. We'll release the clamp die, release the pressure die, move the Y-axis home, and we can check the condition of the bend. So we've got a really small amount of rippling here, so that probably would have got worse if we'd have carried on and done a bigger bend angle. So what that tells me is either the wiper die is not in the correct position, or we haven't got enough pressure die pressure. So realistically, all I did to start with was put hand tension on the pressure die. So the first thing I would do, I know the wiper die is in roughly the correct position. So again, this is where I say about we normally have an extra quarter or half turn of pressure die. So I'll just put that quarter turn on now and we'll do another test bend. So I've reset that now. We've put another quarter turn on the pressure die. Just leave this piece of tube hanging out. We'll clamp it up again, put the pressure die in and do another bend. So whilst I'm setting up the wiper die, I'll also try and set the pressure die speed. So that's how fast that pressure die follows the bend angle round. So I'll just put a little mark to reference the edge of the pressure die. And then as it travels along, I'll watch it and see whether it's moving too fast or too slow relative to the piece of tube. So that's a 30-degree bend this time. Pull the mandrel out. And I can see, looking at the pressure die, it's running a little bit fast because it's kind of overtaken its mark. It doesn't matter that it's running a little bit fast. You want it faster than slower, but given that we've only done a 30-degree bend there, that probably would have been quite a big gap if we'd have carried on right around to a 90 or a 180-degree bend. So I'll probably just slow it down just a touch. Release the pressure die, send the Y-axis home, and then we can have a look at this bend, see how this one came out. So we've got absolutely no ripples this time. That is, we've got no marks from the wiper die, no ripples. That is probably realistically as good as we're ever going to get that set up. There's not really any improvements we can make there. So other than just slowing the pressure die down a touch, it's now just a case of trying a 90-degree bend. If it comes out right on a 90, that's it, we're done. This is where the mandrel ball goes twang. So that's it, we've moved the bend arm round 94 degrees. We don't seem to have any ovaling on the back there really. We've not really got any slippage, which is nice to see. So we should see that this bend comes out really nice on the inside. We've got another really nice quality bend. So we'll just give that a little bit of a spray. Just really start to look at it in detail. But that looks to be pretty good. I'm not sure we could really improve on that. Yeah, that's it. So it's good to go. Let's make some mandrel bends.